Hello and good evening. Welcome to our panel discussion and Q&A this evening. We have a number of panelists who have joined us. We're very excited to see. I'm going to introduce them quickly to you. So we have Parminder, who joins us from NAS Project London. We have Michelle, who is joining us from Clinic Q. We have Lady Phil, who's joining us from UK Black Pride. We have Damien, who's the Mayor of Lewisham. And we have Ben, who's joining us as a correspondent for the BBC on all things LGBT. So these are your panelists. We're going to be chatting with you this evening. A few questions that we want to talk about and have a discussion, and then we're going to invite you to join in that conversation with us as well. You can do that by sending an email to events@metrocharity.org.uk. But you can also just comment on any of the live feeds that you're watching. So you might be seeing this on our YouTube channel. You might be seeing this on our Facebook. You might be seeing this on our Twitter. I looked down just then because I was checking that we are indeed live. I have confirmation people can see us. So that's good news. So the first thing I wanted to do today is just very quickly show you a preview of something that we've been working on over the summer at Metro Charity, which is our Pride First campaign. So what this has been doing is encouraging you, our supporters, our followers, our viewers, our partners, to share some of your first experiences of Pride, and also some of the first iconic things that have happened within that movement that we're all a part of. So I'm going to show you a very short video of how that's going, some highlights, and then we're going to come back to our lovely panelists who are all here, eager, ready to engage in discussion and your questions. So I will pop that on now, and then we will come back to the panel. So enjoy. So that gives you a bit of a flavour, a whirlwind of some key moments, some key Pride firsts that we've been looking at, and also some of the contributions that we've had over the campaign across our social channels. So thank you to everyone who's contributed to that, and hopefully that's put us in the mood for some nice thinking back, thinking now, thinking forward. So I'm just going to ask each of the panel to introduce themselves. So I'm going to unmute you all now just to make sure that you can be heard. So Parminder, would you like to say hello?
Hello, good evening, everyone. That was so moving. It was so lovely to see that video and have all those memories kind of invoked through those images. That was really, really nice. My name is Parminder Sekon. I am the interim CEO of NAS Project London. And as it showed in the video, NAS was formed in 1991 by the late Shivananda Khan, who set up also, prior to NAS Project London, Shakti, which was the South Asian Transgendered Network in 1986. And I remember many, many nights out at a Shakti event in London. And then he set up with a group of lesbian and gay men the NAS Project London, which was the response to the HIV and AIDS epidemic, and allowing, creating a space for BAME people to come together and get access to services. And now, 29 years later, we're still here. We're still providing services for people living with HIV. We do sexual health promotion. We provide counselling. We provide rapid HIV testing, and lots of spaces for peer support. So that's NAS.
Wonderful. Thank you, Parminder. Lovely to have you with us. Michelle, if I unmute you, perhaps you could give us a little intro.
Yeah, I can. Can I say I also love that film. It was just brilliant. I kept kind of dancing a little bit in my seat. But so I'm Michelle Ross. I'm founder of Clinic Q. We're, for those that don't know, Clinic Q is by trans people for trans people. And we've been delivering services for almost 9 years. And we were the first in the whole of the UK and the first across Europe and actually most of the world in the kind of things that we do, because we do focus on HIV, sexual health, well-being, as well as support and counselling. We have 11 therapists who are counsellors, and we have peer support. And in that time, in the 9 years that we've been around delivering services, we've had 6 conferences, planning our 7th as we speak. And also we've worked internationally. We presented at International AIDS Conference in Durban, South Africa, and we were involved in the one in Amsterdam in 2018. And we presented along with the first ever HIV conference for trans people within the IS, within the HIV and AIDS conferences. Yeah, and we're also based in South London now. We were in Central London, and now we're in South London in partnership with King's College Hospital, where I deliver service there every Tuesday. Now it's by appointments. It was very much a walk-in and appointments, but now since COVID and lockdown, we've had to go to appointments only because we can't have a full space. It'd be really packed. The waiting area, the community area would be very packed and full. And now obviously we can't have that. So we have to be aware of that distancing and appointments only. And that's worked out really well. And we've gradually expanded that service on an appointments basis. All our counselling is online.
Excellent. So it sounds like you've adapted really well to our new situation that we find ourselves in. Thank you for your introduction. Lady Phil, let's just unmute you there, and you can also say hello. Is it going to let you? You might need to confirm your end.
There we go. I've unmuted myself. Thank you. Thank you very much. And great to be here with wonderful panelists. I kind of look like I'm, you know, in a tent and I've got like a torchlight, the Blair Witch Project, but it's because I wanted to be comfortable. But yes, so I'm Phil from UK Black Pride, and UK Black Pride was in that amazing video, which, oh, it was just fantastic. I was thinking about all the different ways in how I want to use that video after this session is over, because it's such an educational piece where often people forget what's happened and what's come before them that allows us to have, you know, even platforms and conversations like this. You know, the work has been done in the background for many, many years. So UK Black Pride was set up, and I would say very much by a way of responding to the racism, the sexism, the Islamophobia, transphobia, especially in 2005 when there was a real surge in the BNP far-right activities. We do work alongside so many different organisations because it's got to be collaborative, but the main focus of what we do is looked at through an intersectional lens, meaning that we are taking into consideration not just sexuality, sexual identity, gender diversity. We are looking at socioeconomic, different class status, young, mature, and so forth. And yeah, we've been in, I would say, operation now 15 years, where we just had our birthday, and I'm sure Mark will come on to that. But, you know, I think I've had the pleasure of working with all of our panelists here, or their organisations in some way, shape or form. So it just goes to show you've picked an amazing panel, but I'm trying not to be biased. And I'll leave it there because I'm sure you've got many questions.
Cool, thank you, Phil. Damien, can you tell us a little about you?
Yeah, of course. First of all, Mark, thank you very much and everyone at Metro for hosting today. And that video was wonderful because it's really easy to forget our history as well. And I think it's really important that we share it. A couple of days ago, I watched a film which many of you will have seen, and many people watching this, called David is a Homosexual, which was filmed all in Lewisham, late 70s. James Walsh, one of our councillors, recommended it, and it's another one. And just revisiting that history and just giving some context to kind of how far things have come, but also not forgetting how far things need to go as well. So I'm the Mayor of Lewisham. I was elected as Mayor 2 years ago. And before becoming Mayor, I've been a councillor in Lewisham for 8 years. I've always represented Lewisham Town Centre, which is where I live. And I was involved in the social housing building programme in Lewisham. So we had big commitments about building new social housing, as you can imagine, across London, like Lewisham. We've got massive issues in terms of homelessness and families in temporary accommodation. So that was the focus. And when the previous mayor, Steve Bullock, he'd been there 16 years, when he announced that he was standing down, I ran for the Labour nomination, was lucky enough to get it. And then I feel like I've got the most fantastic job because I love my community. Lewisham's got wonderful people, wonderful community groups, and I feel really proud to be mayor. That said, and as we go through the questions, like there's huge challenges that we're facing before COVID and afterwards, which I think is really important for us to take stock of as a community as well, and think about the impact that can have for us. But I'll leave that for the questions, but really pleased to join you and everyone else on the panel.
Thank you, Damien. And now, last but very much not least, Ben, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, my name is Ben Hunt. I'm the BBC's first LGBT correspondent. It is very good to be here, so thank you so much for the invite. I'm actually on the last week of a month off, so I finally took some holiday for the first time since starting a year and a half ago, and now I understand why people do. I feel like a new person. Like, should have taken holiday sooner. So yeah, I've kind of missed out on whatever's been going on over the past few weeks. I've been in the Alps, I've been camping in forests, and really reconnected with myself and understanding who I am and what I can still offer. And I was feeling a bit burnt out before, but yeah, now I'm feeling back and ready for action. So thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here and continue reporting on sexuality and gender over the next few months and years to come.
Wonderful, thank you. So I think probably the most energized member of our panel and most refreshed. So we have high hopes for you in the discussion. So the first thing that we we're kind of thinking to ask you about is the evolution of the movement. You know, the LGBTQ plus movement has changed a lot over the years. And originally I was going to frame that as a sort of a 50-year time frame, similar to our Pride Firsts campaign. But then I thought, well, actually, let's maybe think about the organisations that we have here as well. So as Lady Phil mentioned, UK Black Pride just celebrated their 15th birthday. How have you seen that evolution of the movement happen through the lens of UK Black Pride?
Well, thank you for the question. You know, it's been a really, really interesting one. As I said, you know, looking at your video, the film, and just seeing how far we've come. I've been fortunate to speak with people like Dorothea, you know, the Black Lesbian and Gay Foundation that they set up, speaking with so many people in the movement to understand what has come before us, because sometimes people have this tendency to say, oh, we're the first to do this or we're the first to do that, when actually maybe history, her story or their story, hasn't actually been written in, because we didn't have social media the way we have it now. So, you know, I think what has changed certainly for UK Black Pride when we started in 2005 has been the amount of people or even organizations that have now come forward to work with us. You know, I'll be honest, when we started, there was so much resistance to, you know, working with a Black Pride. You know, we were told, why on earth don't you just join the normal Pride, whatever normal is supposed to mean? You know, many of us got death threats, I certainly did, and hate mail that came through, you know, calling us separatists or we are being racist. And that has gradually changed. And of course, there's a lot to look at within our own LGBT plus community around racism, sexism, even the transphobia, which is rife and vitriol. And I'm sure Michelle will speak to that. But we've seen a change, and we've seen a massive change in terms of funding, resources. We're still resource and capacity poor, but we are a lot richer than when we first started. When we first started, we had nothing. So it meant we had nothing to lose. And that's very much how movements start. You have, you know, you realize that you have nothing more to lose. And that's why you've got to go forward and put your best foot forward and bring people together and look at how you mobilize and organize and come together with, whether it's trade unions, whether it's grassroots organizations or charities. And that's what we've done with UK Black Pride. We've very much looked at community in its fullest. And when I say community, I should just put that into communities, because we've got very many different communities within the Black POC LGBT plus community. I think what we've seen in terms of the change now, and I'll be brief, is that we can't not mention Black Lives Matter. We can't not mention COVID and how these things are disproportionately impacting Black lives. And we've had to recalibrate, reprioritize what we do and how we do it. But at the same time, I think the different factors of whether it's Grenfell, Windrush, anything else that affects the Black community will, or the POC community, will undoubtedly affect the Black POC queer community as well. And if I can put it into some context, is that we can't just fight a battle or look at challenges in a very blinkered, tunnel visioned way. You know, we cannot just talk about lesbian or gay lives when actually it's got to be everyone's lives. It's got to be about refugees, migrants, asylum seekers, those that don't have access to health, education and housing. So for us, we've seen the change grow because of how our communities have grown and actually addressing their needs and aspirations of what's required.
So a definite evolution over that time, and an evolution that's bringing more and more people together and respecting that intersectionality that increasingly it's something that we see at Metro is the diverse range of service users that are now accessing the provision that we have. Now, Parminder, NAS project, have you seen the same kind of increasing of understanding of intersectionality and a broader engagement with your services over the last 29 years, is it?
Well, I have to say, I mean, the place where NAS was born out of, I mean, it was born out of the HIV pandemic. You know, here we are 30 years later. But NAS was born on the principle of recognizing intersectionality. I mean, that's who we are. That's who many of us, we're not just one thing. I mean, none of us are. And when you can't find a statutory service, a service that is set up to look after you, that understands that, then you get alienation. Then you get people looking over their shoulder and saying, well, we pay taxes, we're part of this community, I work, and yet I can't find a service that recognizes all of me. And so what we found was that people were put in that unenviable situation where people were having to choose between sexual orientation, culture, family. And of course, we all know that those are impossible choices. And what we've seen over the last 29 years is that more and more and more people are absolutely really confident with presenting their whole selves to their families, to their employers, to their friends, to their partners and lovers, and to their family, to their extended families, and say, this is who I am, and I want to be accepted for all that I am, and all of my identity is recognized. So it's not an either or situation. And the last 50 years, the last 29 years for NAS, I agree with Phil, it's definitely been interesting. I mean, you know, 2018, Section 377, part of the Indian Penal Code, was repealed only in the last 2 years, where same-sex relationships were decriminalized. Obviously, that was huge for the Indian diaspora. But then when I think that actually it's only been since 2007 that it's been enshrined in law that you can't discriminate against LGBTQIA communities, that feels quite shocking. That it's only been since 2010 that we've recognized, you know, trans people's rights to have their gender recognized. I mean, that is quite shocking, really. So yes, there have been significant moves forward, lots of strides forward, but I don't think we've quite arrived around those rainbow-colored roses around the front door, as we've all been kind of led to believe that we've all arrived, because I don't think we have. And that's not to discount all the advances, the greater visibility, the greater representation, but I think it is curious that if all these fantastic strides forward that we have made do in reality are tangible and real for people, it is interesting when we do surveys and look at health outcomes, why when LGBTQ communities are surveyed, the things that they say about their own levels of happiness and health and well-being, issues around substance misuse, issues around racism, transphobia, and how it impacts on their ability to derive satisfaction in their lives, well then, those two things don't sit so comfortably with each other, and it poses really important questions for us as leaders in the community about, well, how do we respond to that?
A very, very good point raised, Parminder. And I think that's something that we're going to come back to as a panel, to think about what our priorities are going forward as a movement, as a sector, as a community. What are those things that we really need to focus on to kind of see more positive change, see more things happening that we want to see happen, but not just in terms of legislative change, but also in that lived experience that you're talking about. So when we ask communities how they're experiencing things, how they're feeling, that we're getting positive responses there as well. And it does feel as though sometimes a lot of our progress is surprisingly recent when we think of some of these things, as you highlighted. And I wonder what we've learnt as a movement about how we affect that positive change, how we achieve that. What is it we've learnt from the past that perhaps would help us be a little bit quicker to do some things in the future? You know, have we found any shortcuts maybe? I mean, that's quite a difficult question, but I might ask Michelle, have we found any shortcuts? What have we learned? And how might we progress things a little bit quicker based on what we've learnt from doing things in the past?
Oh, I'm shaking now because I have no idea. Really great answer, and I'd love to. However, I just want to touch on the history of Pride. I mean, in my lifetime, I've seen a lot of changes. I transitioned 50 years ago. So the question of 50 years ago is really relevant to me. I was 19 then. But I remember when pre-67, when cis men and trans women, often people forget that trans women were put in prison for having sex with cis men, as well as cis men having sex with each other, were often put in prison. And so that part of our history is not focused also or inclusive of trans people. And while Pride and LGBTQI have become very inclusive, like others who have spoken, it wasn't always like that. And in a way, it might not still be like that in many sections. But I very much believe in bringing communities together. And I've been going to Pride for over 30 years. I don't walk on Pride so much these days. Being 71, I use that as an excuse. So if anybody ever offers me a ride, I'm going to take it. But, you know, so I have seen a lot of changes. And I think it's important to acknowledge the changes, not just in that 50 years, but recent changes. Otherwise, it just feels like what we're doing, we're standing still and we're not making any progression. And I believe we are making progression. And the aspects of, you know, ClinQ came out of HIV and sexual health. I've been involved with sexual health and HIV for 32 years. And that's when it felt to me like there was a coming together of a community. Before that, it felt people knew each other. There was a scene, there was clubs, there was a gay centre, LGBT, no, it wasn't an LGBT centre, it was own in centre in Calcott Street near Farringdon. But it never felt like the community came together for a reason to create. There was no sexual health services for gay men, for cis gay men. And out of that coming together around HIV, that changed things a lot, completely, in terms of sexual health and HIV. And that's partly, that drive for me was to bring that for trans people, because trans people were not having a good time attending sexual health services. In fact, often they weren't. And when I started ClinQ, I'll talk wider than ClinQ in a minute, but when I started ClinQ, it was, oh, well, you can't have a specialist service for trans people. They'll never come. We've tried it. I said, not your kind of specialist service. So I said, watch. And, you know, actually, it took time. Very few people came for the first 6 months. It was about trust. People had to get trust in us to find out who we were. So we invited people in. Come and see who we are. Get to know us. Let us get to know you. And we went out to the community. We didn't sit there thinking, oh, why are they not coming? We kind of had an idea why they wouldn't be coming. So we went out to people. And that's what I think is about being involved and from the community. I think that partly makes a difference. But what was the other part of the question? Because I'm going to get wrapped up in ClinQ if I don't.
And really, anything that we've learned that we can use in the future to affect change more, positive change more quickly. And I suspect perhaps from what I'm hearing is there's something to learn around doing this together from what you're saying. So actually, as a community coming together, but then also engaging as a community with services that maybe aren't delivering what we're looking for, but engaging with proactively to get something that's better.
Yes, and what Parminder said, you just reminded me about what Parminder said about, really, trans people are still discriminated in terms of all health services, because there's no data on all health services. There's now, through the work of ClinicQ and other services, data from Public Health England on HIV, trans people living with HIV in the UK, where there was nothing for so many years, 30 plus years, there was nothing, no data on HIV and trans people. And then still no data on STIs, sexually transmitted infections in trans people. And, there's a really important change is going to take place around that. So, but other health, trans people don't exist in a bubble. So all the other health services need to have an inclusive data, because otherwise you can't look at the issues of what is affecting various different aspects of the community. And when you think about intersectionality, there's many layers within that. Anyway.
No, that's a really, really good point. Thank you, Michelle. One of the things that struck me when you were talking is this notion of coming together around HIV, a common foe. So through adversity, we come together, and there's something that comes out of that. And right now, we're kind of going through another common foe. There's this COVID-19 business going on that I think hasn't escaped any of our attention. And certainly at Metro, it's really challenged how we deliver services because of the prevention measures that need to be in place. We can't come together in a way that we've done in the past. We need to find new ways of delivering services. But I wonder, to open to all of the panel, how has COVID-19 impacted on LGBTQ plus communities? Both in a negative and perhaps even a positive sense. Are we getting this coming together feeling again, or is that not happening this time round? Any takers?
I'm going to say something. I think there's learning a different way of working has been a really important part for ClinicQ. We never used to see people online for our counselling. Now it's all online. But we had to do that quickly. And we did that with looking at governance, safeguarding, all the issues. And while we can work online throughout the UK for trans and non-binary people, actually we also look at people who don't have that opportunity to be online, people in multiple housing occupation, people in unsafe housing. There's lots of people that can't access our services in that way, even by phone, if we can do it by phone. Some people don't have access to that phone. So we need to look at, it's kind of quite a privilege to be able to do this kind of thing online, because there's many people that can't. And anyway, that's how I wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, that's definitely something we've seen in terms of sort of digital exclusion. When you move services online, not everybody has the technology or enough technology for everyone in the household to have, a piece of tech all of the time. Maybe it needs to be passed around, maybe it's not always available, maybe it doesn't exist at all. And certainly what we have done is, where possible, we've made bits of technology available through grants and kind of sent those out to service users so they can engage. Damien, it looks like you've unmuted. I think you had something to add, perhaps.
I was just coming up, but as you can imagine, from the council perspective, it's in every single service that we're providing, we're having to change how we do things. And we've gone from having 2,000 people work for the council. We can only at the moment get about 150 people in the office. So just kind of getting people and getting all those services online has been a huge challenge. Where we are now, all of us, is we're preparing for, and I'm sure all our organisations will be preparing for, a second wave. And really, it's vital, and Michelle's point is so well made about data, because there is such an absence of data across lots of services, particularly around health, not just with LGBT+, also with regards to race. I've been so surprised in the 2 years that I've been there. I chair something called the Health and Wellbeing Board, which is a body of the local health leaders. And I set them like a challenge, and it was looking at racial health inequalities as the challenge over the course of my administration, the 4 years that I'm there, and just the lack of data that exists. And we're at this point now where we need to ensure, and you know, Lewisham, we can do our bit as a local authority, but we also need government to be taking stock. Who has been? It is without doubt that COVID disproportionately impacts people of colour, particularly some Asian communities, Black Caribbean communities. And what are we doing? What are we putting in place now to stop that happening again? What are we doing to communicate? So when we talk about intersectionality, how are we communicating with different groups within Lewisham and within the country, and with the LGBT community as well? I don't know, you're asking, Mark, about kind of has it helped LGBT groups kind of come together, and I just kind of thought, actually it's the first kind of panel, I think this is the first LGBT event I've done, and that much is because I've had my head in kind of COVID recovery. But I'd like to think, I think there's probably more that we should do now that there's going to be more stuff online. I think it's definitely something that we must be taking forward. And I just wanted to kind of, the question you were asking just before, I might go back to it, about the kind of positive change and how do you affect it. I think if there's one lesson is we constantly have to fight for things. We have to come together, as you said, be organized, and we constantly have to fight. And I think if we look at, you know, what's happening now around the questioning around trans rights, it just shows, you know, it constantly has to be fought for. And it's horrible to say, but things can't be taken for granted. Last year, it was September, and I started counting them, was the first time in Lewisham that myself and my partner Yossi, we were walking and holding hands, and people said stuff. And then over the course of a few months, there were 6 different occasions. And it really knocked our confidence. And I know this is kind of like post-Brexit, and there's the kind of culture wars that exist on social media as well. But it just made me think, wow, this is something that I just thought people didn't care about. I felt it was a bit naive. And it's just something like visibility is critical, but only visibility like if you can. And not everyone has that ability to be visible. But I guess my experience has just been, I'm a lot more cautious, and just kind of in a practical, going around looking at surroundings and then just thinking, well, if that's my experience as a white gay man, how is that experience if I'm Black, if I'm trans, if I'm first generation migrant family? There's that intersectionality really is so vital. But the key point around making change is where we have shown it with legalization of homosexuality, of equal age of consent, gay marriage today, with the campaigns around PrEP, around trans rights, will make inroads when we come together. And those people on the panel who are involved, you know, it's not just about, as I'm sure Lady Phil will know, like Black Pride in the event is one thing, but it's all the work with the politicians, the MPs, the trade unions, all of those different groups, like the activists. I think they're doing a phenomenal job, and we need to make sure that we're giving them support.
Definitely well said. I think also perhaps we might reflect on some of the positive changes that we've seen, in that we have people like Ben. So we have people who are openly gay, who are on our television telling us about the news. I mean, that does feel like progress to me. Ben, did you think that's progress? Are you happy to have that job?
yeah, I am. I'm very happy to have this job, and I know that it is a big thing for BBC News as well, to have an LGBT specialist. I think, especially in these times where you're seeing newsrooms being cut and jobs being reduced, it's quite a big, bold statement to have someone covering specifically gender and sexuality. So yeah, I'm very proud to be in this role. And I think over the year and a bit that I've held this position, I think I've shown the importance of it. I think we've seen how there are so many conversations happening both within and about the community that is important to kind of reflect on and be a part of. So yeah, it's been a journey. It continues to be a journey, but yeah, I'm very proud to be in this role. And I think it does show the amount of change that has happened. If I'm looking at my personal experiences, I mean, my family's from Guyana, which is the only country within the Americas where it's still technically illegal to have gay sex. So I'm first generation British. My family are a very loving and accepting Black family, but I'm very fortunate in that respect. I genuinely the other day, we were looking at the number of Black gay men who are British, who are kind of out and living their lives openly. And well, I challenge you to name more than 5 that are out on a public UK platform. It's a struggle, but here we are. We're moving. We're doing what we do, and yeah, we are where we are, and I'm very grateful to people that have kind of stepped before me and done the work in order to allow me to live as open a life as I do. And even though it may be difficult, I'm not going to stop anytime soon.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to wind back to something that Damien mentioned in terms of the experiences that trans members of our community might be having. And there's some stuff perhaps linked in there with Brexit, some things linked in with, you know, prejudices that people have always had but feel a bit more free to share, but also a narrative in the media that we're seeing, potentially even in parts of the media where we perhaps thought we had allies, where there's almost this questioning of, do trans people exist? Which seems like such a weird premise to come at something, because, well, clearly trans people do exist. You know, they're in our communities, they're part of our communities, they are people, and as people, they have human rights. So what is driving this? What is causing that sort of negative coverage within the media and that sort of weird positioning around not even really accepting the existence of trans people? So we're sort of just asking questions about what may or may not be allowed. It seems very, very bizarre place to be, quite regressive in many respects. Michelle, I think perhaps you wanted to add something there. Oh, let's pop you on.
Okay, I was thinking about how that's changed, that very clear transphobia, negativity on a daily basis, and how it used to be, where trans people would be mocked, made fun of, you know, yeah, in a different way. Now, and I think the bigger impact you make in awareness and who you are. I remember in the early 80s and 70s, and before that, gay men were seen, you know, there was no visible positive images of gay men, cis gay men. And it was like the limp-wristed, or, you know, doing all this. And there's nothing wrong with that, but then there was no balance of that. And that was similar for trans people. Trans people were seen as something to be mocked, made fun of. Now it's pernicious. Now it's harmful in many cases, or can be. And when you think about COVID-19 and the things that we're in, and the isolation and the issues that you can be feeling around that, and the impact on mental health, and believe me, we're seeing that regularly within our counselling services. We also, trans people are also dealing what we've been discussing about, what we can't term TERFs, and there's money behind that. There's big money and big names, without naming people, although I want to. There are big names promoting that, and money behind it across the world, well, mainly in the Western world, I think. But whatever that means. So, you know, the impact can be huge. And yeah, I can't underestimate it, really, especially younger people who might not have the skills to deal with it and separate it in some way. And older people. Actually, we often forget about older trans people. I've got an investment here, being in my 70s. No, but, you know, some trans people have been on hormones for 50 years, like me, and other people. And there's no awareness about the needs for older trans people. And maybe a lot of that applies to LGBTQI older people. So, you know, and I've heard trans people say, oh, we can deal with isolation. You know, it's what we've experienced, you know, most of our lives, or what when you start speaking about being trans, and how that can be an isolating from either workplaces or social environments, or family, institutional, and societal. And yet, there's a difference. I think there is a difference with the issues for trans people and COVID-19, and the lack of actual getting to a place where you can be with others who you can be with. I know there's a lot for trans people on online like this, and we've been doing quite a lot at Clinic Q. And so, you know, yeah, it's almost making me can't breathe, but I mean, I can, because I've got a lot of skills and I will come back on it. But yeah, anyway. I don't know if I went off track there, Mark.
I mean, perhaps, Ben, do you have any thoughts on what we can do to encourage more positive media engagement around the rights of trans people, the fact that trans people exist, and that we very much do need to be supportive, inclusive, and engage with all.
Yeah, I suppose I like that you said positive as well. Thank you for adding a bit of positivity in there. I think that this is obviously a really, really controversial area. It's a tough one. If I'm looking at some of the external work that I do outside the BBC, I run a confidence academy for young people. And at least once a week pre-COVID, I would travel around the country and speak to young people in their schools about having confidence and the need to have confidence and need to being themselves. And I did that for a year and a half, didn't put it on social media because I don't really like the internet and I don't like people judging things. But I just went around to these schools and I spoke to young people, and it was awesome connecting with them and experiencing or hearing about their experiences and what they're going through. One of the biggest learnings that I had was at a school in Cleethorpes, where in one class, I think it was like 10 to 11-year-olds, not a single one of them identified as straight. They were all pansexual or bisexual or something else. And it really cemented in my mind that actually what we're seeing is real generational differences. You're seeing a generation coming up who are far more woke than me, far more passionate about gender and sexuality than me or any of us here. And you're seeing that kind of rift between these generations played out almost on a daily basis in the media. So if you're on TikTok, if you're on Instagram, you're living in a very cool bubble where everything is wonderful and rosy and all full of representation. If you're reading the Daily Mail and the Mirror and all of that, then you're seeing a very different perspective. Now, here at the BBC, we are obviously impartial. So what you're seeing from our coverage is you're seeing a lot of trans representation. You're seeing a lot of me platforming people's voices, but you're also seeing debate around what would be considered more controversial topics. If you're looking at something like the Gender Recognition Act, most people on the high street couldn't tell you what that is. They have no understanding of it. So by breaking that down, you're almost inviting further critique and further opinions in on that. And I think maybe that's where we've got to, is that you've seen so much representation and so many more people being platformed that actually these external voices are now coming in, weighing in on this. And yeah, it's at a time when everyone's just shouting at each other. Within my role, I'm very lucky that people do trust me to tell their stories, and I'm contacted on a daily basis by LGBT people, especially trans people, who are worried about representation. And as a result, they put themselves forward for things. And I suppose that's my biggest ask in answer to your question, is the way to overcome what you don't like seeing in the media is to put yourself forward. We're all in control of what we're seeing because we're all holding media devices on a daily basis. So represent, go on social media, contact the BBC. It's very humbling that some people go through ridiculously traumatic experiences and think the first person I'm going to contact is Ben Hunt at the BBC to tell him my experiences. But it's wonderful that they do, because as a result, I can then share them with bigger audiences who can also learn from them. So yeah, we're at a really critical point, I think, when we're looking at trans lives. We're waiting for the government to release some changes, or what some people are hoping will be changes, to the way that trans people are treated in the UK. So we'll have to wait and see, but speak to the media, speak up, and let yourself be known.
Some good advice, thank you. We'll certainly be doing our best to engage with the media as much as possible, encourage others to do the same, to try and affect the positive changes that we still need to see. Something else that's been a lot in the media is, of course, Black Lives Matter. And I think it's a really interesting time for us as organisations that today, especially, we're kind of looking at the LGBTQ plus lens, but how do these things intersect? So I think Parminder and Lady Phil, you've been talking about that intersectionality, but there's a sort of momentum now, isn't there? Black Lives Matter has definitely got some momentum going. So what is it we could do with that? What other collaborations could be possible between our communities, between those that are in both parts of those communities? And how can we all come out as being anti-racist? So that is open to whoever would like to answer that question. No pressure.
Well, I'll just make a few observations to begin with. In short, Mark, I think, how do you come out as anti-racist? You do the hard work. I mean, that is the short answer. There is no other way. And where I'm coming from is that when you have been accustomed to privilege all your life, you know, equality can feel very oppressive. And that's what's happening. People don't want to give up their power or their privileges, or are struggling with that. You know, the issues that have come out of Black lives have always been there. Black people, Black queer people have been shouting about those issues, not just in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but for decades. And many people have heard that. But equally and more people have just decided to ignore that. And now there has been a huge white outcry about it. And suddenly we are all allowed to talk about the racism that we experience on a daily basis. I cannot tell you the number of times I have been told, you've got to play nicely. You've got to, it's all about partnerships, and you can't really say the R word. We know it's happening, but we've got to make it okay for the people that we are talking to. Because if we alienate them, then that's going to be problematic. And it's just so interesting that I have heard that message over and over again. And that you need to speak the language of the dominant culture, otherwise you will alienate a potential ally. And I think that, you know, Kamala Harris, you know, she said, didn't she, in the last couple of days, there's no vaccine for racism. And, you know, and there's no shortcut. You've got to do the work. You've got to look at where you stand on a number of issues. And, you know, we've just been talking about transphobia. There comes a point where you have to decide what side of the fence you're going to be on. Are you operate from an inclusive approach principle, or are you protecting a space where others cannot come in because you feel that you are under threat? And if, you know, for me, I feel like the only really meaningful way forward for progression is that you have to start from a place of inclusivity. And then you can have those hard discussions. But if the starting point is, I'm going to shout at you and I am not going to listen to you, then we are not going to move forward. I'm sure the panelists got lots more to say on that.
I see you're unmuted. I suspect you might have something to add.
Loads, and you know, I almost want to cry as Parminder's talking, because when I started and we started introducing ourselves, I made a point of saying that the resistance that came against UK Black Pride was because we've been doing this for a long time. We've been talking about structural and systemic racism within our institutions and within society at large. And you know, when we use the word intersectionality, I hope that we can use it in its correct frame and lens, because it's about those various oppressions that exist for particular identities, and it's about how it intersects with each other. So when we're talking about race, gender, class, socioeconomic, all of the many different factors that compound each other, we find that we're constantly fighting, constantly wishing to challenge the inequalities that we see within society. But, you know, to your point, Mark, and the question that you raised about, you know, we're seeing such a, you know, a different sort of climate now. Yeah, we're seeing it because, as Parminder said, there is a white noise around, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And I'm going to give a very quick trigger warning, 3 seconds. That when George Floyd was brutally murdered in cold daylight, when his neck was pressed in and he could not breathe, that was not new to Black communities. That was new because social media and people's cameras showed it. We have been talking, even from a UK perspective, about deaths in custody, you know, the brutality that's reigned upon Black and brown communities. So when we are talking about our LGBT plus community, we cannot forget the different parts of all of our communities that face various inequalities that need to be addressed. You know, there's a thing when we're saying Black Lives Matter, and some people say, yes, well, all lives matter. You know, I use the analogy of if a house is burning and the fire brigade come along and they start spraying water on all the houses because they think that all houses matter, then what happens to the house and the people and the content of the house that is actually burning? So if it does mean we have to address the burning critical issue of Black lives which have not mattered, and there's a historical context to that, you know, whether it's from enslavement, slavery, colonialism, right up to present day, because of, you know, health, housing, education, so many different things. The stats do not lie. And also going to your point about, and I'm trying to address all the little points that you make, you know, media. I work closely with Ben, and I love the fact that he amplifies so many different voices and organizations and civil society. But there is also, the media plays such a big part in who it wishes to represent. You know, there's a hierarchy that you have to go through before you can even present what you want to talk about and amplify. And when you have media platforms who are allowing a presenter, without naming any names, to use the N-word, how do we come forward and talk about what we actually need? How do we actually go forward and really say this is a burning issue? And then, you know, not to mention COVID. And of course, it's affecting everyone globally. It really is. But those who hold power and privilege and things that may feel like it's in an echo chamber, you will find that there will be particular communities which are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And, you know, I'm going to be really honest, Mark, you know me. I say things and people are like, oh my gosh, she's such a nightmare. She doesn't stop. I say things that will make people feel uncomfortable. I don't say things to make you feel guilty, because as I've said, guilt is self-indulgent. And any of your amazing listeners and viewers who are watching right now, we need to be feeling uncomfortable. Because if we keep on talking about what the next generation needs, what they need around trans rights, around race equity, around poverty, and, you know, around so many different things, representation, policies and procedures in workplaces, we have got to start now by not just learning, but unlearning bad behaviors which have been instilled in our workplaces, in our societies, and what we've been doing for so long. So I think, yes, there is a surge and a new movement happening, and it's great, and I'm hopeful and I'm positive about what I'm seeing. But what I will say is that allies, and we're all allies here to whatever different cause, it cannot be performative. It cannot be tokenistic. It has to be real, and it has to be about meaningful engagement. So we cannot just say, you know, no, I'm not racist. We cannot have the debates and say, oh, well, does racism exist? We know it does. Does transphobia exist? We know it does. We're seeing our siblings who are being killed left, right, and center in the States, and also mental health and suicide rates over here are really high. We can't be having debates about people's lives in a way that doesn't serve the people who are impacted. What we've got to do is have meaningful engagement, and we all have to take accountability about what type of future we want to see. As a mother of a 25-year-old child, and I say child, she's a grown woman, but as a mother of a 25-year-old, I want to know that the legacy that we leave behind makes it easier for that young Black woman to walk into a workplace and claim her space, for her to be out on the street and not have to be called the N word or the B word. So it means we have to do the groundwork now. Yes, amplify stories in the media and make sure that that's being told. Damien doing what he's doing in the local authority and really making sure he's capturing that data. Michelle, trans rights for us, by us, and making sure that UK Black Pride supports and amplifies that. And Naz, who we've worked with before, is making sure that we start talking about anti-Blackness, but we also make sure we've got the history, her story and their story, and the knowledge of what came before, so we don't find ourselves in situations where the services that need to be acquired are not. And I'm going to stop there because I can feel myself feeling like I need to light a cigarette and sip on a glass of wine. But I really am thinking that meaningful engagement is what's important, not performative or tokenistic gestures about Black Lives Matter now, but when it's not trending, people have gone back to doing what they're doing. I'm going to stop. But thank you for listening.
No, thank you. And thank you for being the person that is happy to make us feel uncomfortable, because actually that is important. Because if we don't challenge the way in which people are thinking, they're not going to think differently. And that's often the problem, is people aren't thinking differently, aren't taking on the experiences of others, and live in quite an insular way, only really reflecting on their own experiences. And if you are part of a dominant culture within a society, then your thoughts won't be very often challenged. So we need people to challenge those thoughts so that we can learn new things and increase our understanding. What I'd quite like to do at this point, because it feels like, Phil, you were getting towards kind of what I would call some priorities, some actions, some things we need to think about to take forward. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask all of the panel is actually, as LGBTQ plus leaders, what are the top 3 priorities that we need to take forward as a movement to affect the kind of changes that we still need to see? And that's open to all. So whoever wants to come in on that one, feel free. Damien?
So I'll start from a kind of council perspective. And so the first one, I think we have to, it would never be the front and centre of a campaign, but we absolutely must be making the case about funding. If I take Lewisham Council, when I became a councillor in 2010, our budget was 420 million in real terms. Today it's 240. Post-COVID, the government want another £14 million out of the council. I cannot overstate just how difficult that is, and we're having to ask some real fundamental questions about not even just services to cut, even services that we can even provide anymore. And I represent a borough that's got so much poverty that it needs the opposite. It needs so much investment, and I really feel that it's on the impact that will be felt on all vulnerable communities and for LGBT communities. will be bigger than on others, and so that has to be something. I had two other ones I was going to put, because it was the top three, was how do we be better allies as a movement of our trans community? How can we be better allies? And I was actually encouraged by what Ben said with your experience at school in Cleethorpes, because we do a lot of work with young people in Lewisham. I kind of think, well, it's a Lewisham bubble, so you expect young people in Lewisham, where they might be more exposed, to kind of be more open to things. I do wonder what happens as people get older. But as much as, and I'm always saying this to the council, because we obsess a little bit about Twitter and putting stuff on social media, and of course everyone's got to have a profile. But we've got, as a council, 25,000 followers. There are 300,000 people that live in Lewisham. So what about all those people who aren't on Twitter and aren't following and what we're doing? How do we make sure that we get those messages outside of our bubbles? Because I can go to events, I can speak to people at panels like this, and this is brilliant. This is kind of a group regrouping exercise. But how do we make the case in those bubbles that we're less comfortable in?
Thank you, Damien. And the two that I've taken there, our priorities are to be better allies, and our priority is to get the messages outside of the bubbles that we're often existing within. What other priorities do we have as a movement, to other panelists? What other things do we need to put front and center in terms of what we're addressing? Michelle?
Mark, I'd like to...
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say a couple of things. I think that putting the most marginalized part of our LGBTQI communities in the center of what we're discussing would be a really, really important priority. I'm thinking about COVID, and I'm thinking about, you know, the COVID loans, people on furlough, people who have lost jobs. You know, LGBTQI people make up society. We are those people as well. You think about the most marginalized in terms of immigration, in terms of being, you know, on NAS support, £38 a week. You know, I mean, it does really require people to think about that. Think about living a life on £38 a week. You know, during COVID, universal credit got a 20% uplift. NAS support didn't. So the immigration process is really dehumanizing. You know, putting LGBTQI people in detention because they have dared to say that returning back to their home countries would put their life at risk is seen as, we need to punish them by putting them into detention. I've worked with couples that have been torn apart when UK Border Agency has come to their home and have separated couples and taken one into detention when they have only ever lived their lives together. It's absolutely demoralizing and truly shocking. And this is where people really need to up their game in terms of empathy and understanding the lives people really lead and the impact that it has. Because I think for any one of us here today, if we had to go through that experience, I'm not sure how we would come through it the other end. Mm-hmm. And then when we talk about trauma, and I noticed some people mentioned on the chat talking about mental health services, I don't think we can, as a community that have lived through the HIV pandemic, that are living through COVID, that are living through spikes in hate crime, we cannot underestimate the impact of homophobic, transphobic induced trauma. So that's one thing. Also, I think as a movement, we need to be ready for a backlash. We've seen it happen. We've seen it happen in America when Obama left. We've seen it happen after Brexit. every time. And I am seeing it happen with Black lives. You know, Phil talked about people saying, well, you know, we should be talking about all lives matter, and demanding to have a platform and demanding to talk about that, actually really pulling the focus away from what we really should be speaking about. And also I want to say something about LGBT education. Because we've seen when people really brave teachers, brave heads, you know, take on a community. We've seen it happen at Anderton Park School in Birmingham, when they've kind of walked the walk and taught the talk, the kind of responses that can come. And there, you know, the local authority did stand tall with the local school. But it was really, really hard for the teachers, really hard for the pupils and the students. All primary school age. Yet, these are the young people that are going to grow up, go to secondary school, and they need to understand that we have laws in this country that make homophobia, transphobia illegal. And if they're caught on the wrong side of that, you know, they can be prosecuted. And it's an utter disservice not to allow our young people to have those really important conversations in a safe space. So I think that's really important. And those are just a couple of priorities.
Definitely priorities we need to take forward. Any more priorities from our panelists? Michelle, sorry, yes, you did indicate earlier.
Yeah, that's okay. I guess for me, one priority, it's a lot actually, there's a lot, but about trans rights, I hear people saying trans rights, you know, trans rights are important, trans rights are human rights, but actually, what are trans rights? What are they? It's not a buzzword, it's not a throwout, it's not a label on a placard. What does it mean to me, really mean? Because when I ask people what are trans rights, and they might say, oh, they're human rights, but what does that mean for a daily lived life of someone, actually? I think people don't actually understand, and my hope that people really do understand what trans rights really means. And we talk, you know, LGBTQ, I think that's really important around education, around awareness, but we also need to look at our differences within that communities. We need to look at the priorities and the differences. And if we don't educate on those, then we're not doing anything. Well, we're doing good, but we're not really informing people of the differences and maybe the similarities, but the differences, because there is a structure of privilege within the LGBTQI, right? Phil and Paminda have spoken about that already in terms of Black and people of colour. You know, and me as a white trans person, I have a privilege as well of that being white, you know, and within our community, the trans communities, there's a real lack of privilege for other people, for Black and people of colour, on specific health needs, and specific services for Black and people of colour, trans people. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Michelle. And I think it is really important that we do recognise those differences, and certainly it's sort of something that Metro reflects on quite passionately in terms of how we go about our work and actually embracing that difference and celebrating that difference, but also educating around that difference. And there's something that I wanted to bring in that maybe I will in a moment, but just to park it with you, is actually how do we, in the services that we deliver, move towards something that's more aspirational. So it's very easy to kind of respond to things that perhaps we see as deficits. So we say, a lot of trans young people have a lot of mental health issues, so we need services to support them around mental health to address that issue that's going on for them. But actually, how do we move that to a position where we're increasing that celebration of difference. We're highlighting what those differences are. We're increasing understanding, and we're changing the environment in which people exist, so that actually they don't have mental health issues necessarily as a result of social pressures. And therefore, actually, we can focus on more aspirational services that actually help people attain the things that they want to achieve in their lives. How do we make that shift? And I'll leave that with you to think about for a little while, because Lady Phil, I think you had something you wanted to come in with.
Yeah, there's some really great points that are being made here, and somebody on your Facebook, I'm not sure who they are, they said, you know, Parminder and myself mentioned about, you know, how do we have these uncomfortable conversations without burning out particular communities. I was trying to look cute by not putting my glasses on, but yes. Yeah, about the discomfort that doesn't break a person of color. And absolutely, I think that, you know, I love the fact that they've raised this point. I'm very clear that when we're talking about the things that we need, and also wanting to celebrate who we are, is that we say that although we are centering us and are centering those who are in most need of whichever particular service, we're not going to be the ones that do the hard donkey work and labor because we've been doing it for so long. If it's about racism, then I'm going to go and say to my white comrades, look, I don't have to go and search up. Google is your friend. I'm tired. I'm kind of burnt out from talking about racism. I've been Black 365 days of the year. You know, I've been LGBT 365 days of the year. Why don't you go and do some research? Why don't you look at various websites like Metro, like NAS, like Clinic Q, like UK Black Pride? There are so many resources out there. And I know that I always talk about this yellow pages of like providers of services. I think that we need that. And of course, I'm old school because I'm talking about yellow pages. Well, maybe a social media yellow pages that tells you how to contact Black Minds UK, who are raising money to support Black and POC communities in giving them free therapy to support them through a climate and an era that feels so heavy and so difficult. Many of us have lost loved ones. And one of your earlier comments, somebody mentioned domestic violence. You know, we also within the LGBTQ plus community need to be speaking about, you know, domestic violence. We've seen a spike and a rise in that. So your point again about priorities, Damien mentioned funding. Absolutely. Let's look at the funding that's needed, and not just for, you know, big organizations, but charities who are doing the work, who, as Parminder said, people have gone on furlough, you know, they're having to give up their rental accommodations because we can't afford to keep it going, just so the services can still stay alive and are sustainable. And I think one of a priority for UK Black Pride, not mine, is about how we hold the government to account and how we put the flame by the feet and say, look, this is what's happening. We've collected data, we've got research, we've got lived experiences, we've got stories, we've got case studies. And if, you know, you're my local MP or you're a minister who holds a particular budget, you need to be hearing this. Otherwise, what you'll find 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, after the many austerity cuts that are being made, is that different pockets of marginalized communities will be the ones impacted again. And fall deeper and deeper into a very, very dark, soul-destroying place. And then lastly, because I know I can talk, I can talk for Ghana. You know, you can put the mute button on if I go on too much.
It's a panel discussion. You can talk. It's fine. Talking's the name of the game.
Yeah.
About, you know, positive. Now, whilst there's a lot of things which are heavy and negative, UK Black Pride has always seen our challenges of challenging inequality and protest, as well as celebration. That's why we exist. We celebrate ourselves, we center ourselves, we create a Black Pride which is by us and for us, and it is really strong in talking about, you know, as Michelle said, trans rights. What does that mean? When we say trans rights or Black people's rights or Black equity, we're talking about housing, health, all the things that we don't necessarily have access to because of lack of power and privilege. And what we did this year to celebrate is to make sure money that we raised through our Black Lives Matter campaigning is that we put it back into communities, and we said to refugee and asylum seeker communities, we are going to top up your data so you can celebrate with us, because prides are supposed to be inclusive. So we used that money to make sure we could engage with the whole of our communities, and we reached out to 5 organizations, supported, I think it was over 60 people that wished to participate. So celebration is there, but at the same time, we can't deny the outcry of what we need when people are in pain.
Yeah.
Definitely very good points there, Lady Phil. I'm going to have another little shift because actually you've done part of my job for me, Phil. So thank you in terms of taking a look at those comments and making sure we're coming back to the people asking us questions. And I've got one here that I'll bring up for us to have a look at. This one here. So how do we as LGBTQ leaders motivated by equality for all recognize out and challenge institutional discrimination, institutional racism, sexism? How do we do that? Who would like to have the first go on that one?
I would love to if possible. Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't run an organization. I'm kind of a cog within the BBC wheel. But one of the reasons I became a journalist, just around 3 years ago now, is to hold people to account. And I think it's so important to speak out. Like I said before, I'm very humbled by the fact that people do come to me with their experiences, a variety of different things. But that's how I get my stories. I'm an original journalist. I have to do original stories and exclusives. So for me, it really is about speaking out. It literally is about recognizing it and platforming it, and doing something about what you know. So if you do have experiences and you're watching this, or you're working for an organization that isn't really up to scratch, or you're aware of inequalities that are happening with one of your friends receiving benefits, or your doctor isn't looking after you in the way that you think they should, reach out. Don't just suffer in silence. Actually speak to organizations, speak to me, speak to whoever, and actually platform those experiences. I think that I'm going to toot the BBC's trumpet, but I really do think that public service broadcasting is one way to challenge institutional discrimination, because people do act when they're embarrassed and shamed. It just is what it is.
Made that classic Zoom error of talking with myself muted. Sorry, everybody. Even when I'm not on Zoom, still make a Zoom error. Anyone else have thoughts about how we can tackle institutional discrimination?
Can I come on this point? Because I think it's there's been so much discussion over a very long time about institutional racism, and there's so much knowledge. And I think we need to use the impetus that the Black Lives Matter movement gives us to take action. And if you're in positions where, what's the action being taken? And I'm asking that in the council of every single service. Like, well, what are we doing? We've been too relaxed on some things. So, for example, in Lewisham, last year, just a quarter of children from Caribbean backgrounds got 5 good GCSEs. And that's against 40-something% of white children. So massive gaps. Similar with other councils, it's not just the Lewisham thing, but it's been like that for a very long time. And if you're asking the question, well, what's been done over a long time to change it? I think there's a lot of councils like us where things have been tried and not succeeded, but has that impetus always been there? And it's about challenging it. This year was the first time we followed Lambeth Council in making sure that ethnicity is recorded on death certificates. Sounds really obvious, but it was country of birth before. So we were trying to do a project about Black mental health and suicide. And sorry, my Siri's coming on. about Black mental health and suicide, and we actually couldn't get the data; it didn't exist, because a whole heap of people who are well, Ben, if you're on the panel, if you'd be listed as UK, and so you wouldn't be captured at all. So it doesn't exist. So looking at everything and seeing what are we doing, and then another project that we're doing in Lewisham that I'm trying to work within the Labour Party is around drugs reform as well. Like how many young Black men I speak to who've been stopped and searched by the police because of colour, but using the drugs misuse of drugs act being used as an excuse for stop and search, primarily in cannabis. We had last year 49 children, so it's almost a child a week, who were first-time entrants to our youth offending service. The majority there because of cannabis. Of those 49, 43 were children of colour. Like, it's extraordinary. And every single child in Lewisham who was given a custodial sentence by the courts were children of colour. So I think it is imperative on anyone in a position of authority to be saying, right, well, these are the issues. And I understand people will, of course, people will be embarrassed about it. I feel embarrassed about it. I've only been married 2 years, but you inherit this. Of course you do. And it's, well, what actions are you taking? And post-COVID, one of the things that we're looking at is not just the council, but how do we bring together other organisations across Lewisham? So the college, the hospital trust, Goldsmiths, and just as all of those organisations, we come together. What are you also doing to make sure that you're improving racial inequalities within all of your organisations and all your services as well? And recognising, I think, that it's going to take a long time, and it's something that will need decades of work, but we need to have leaders in there who are just willing to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And then I hope I hand over to a mayor who's going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing till we get to where we want to be.
Difficult, but definitely worth the outcome if we can achieve it. And it's good to hear of the good work that's happening in Lewisham under the leadership of what sounds like a very good mayor. Minda, you've unmuted. Did you want to add something?
Yes, I was just, all the things that Damien was saying really resonating with me around, yes, of course, it's really, really important that we have good metrics. And that's really one good way to challenge institutional racism in terms of having the evidence, having the body of evidence to say, actually, this isn't okay. But then as Damien was speaking, I was saying, what do you do? And for all of us who work day in, day out in sexual health, what do you do when you have decades, year after year, Public Health England data pumped out that absolutely makes explicit the disparities between different ethnic communities? And it's there for everyone to see, and yet nothing is being done. Nothing is happening. And then the response, so action, I absolutely agree that we need to look at, well, okay, well, what actions are we doing now to respond to this? But what are the quality of those actions? Is it a knee-jerk reaction? Is it a one-off response, like something funded for 2 years? How, or even 3 years, or even 4 years? We talked earlier about trust. Michelle talked about, people come to her service because they have spent a long time building up the trust. People trust Ben. People trust UK Black Pride. And they go because they are getting something that they haven't got something from mainstream Pride. So you can't turn around years and years of neglect through funding a project for 3 years. And then say, okay, what's the magic bullet then? Let's get some results. Oh, well, it hasn't delivered, so we need to decommission that service and let's look for innovation. This constant push. I'm speaking from a BAME organization, but I'm sure other people will see it as well. Tell me what's innovative about what you're doing. We want innovation and this constant push forward for give me innovation. That's what we need. well, actually, yes, innovation is good, but shall we deal with, if we're looking at Maslow hierarchy of needs, let's look at the bottom rung here. Maybe we don't need innovation. Maybe we need consistency, reliability. Maybe we just need to stand in one place and keep communicating the message to people. We are here. We believe in you. We believe that we need to invest in services, and it may take 10 years, and you may not get results until the 9th year. And let's not just give people enough rope to hang themselves. Let's keep investing in those providers that are delivering. Because I hear this over and over again. If you want Black leadership, you need to trust Black leadership or any kind of leadership of marginalized communities. But part of any leadership, and all of us that are representing communities know it's a hard slog, and you will make mistakes, and you should be allowed to make mistakes, and there should be some space to grow and some investment. And you should have a budget where you can invest in your workforce to allow them to grow, considering they are on the front line of some really challenging work. So that question about how do you challenge institutional racism, I think it is about having those uncomfortable conversations, maybe being confronted with some white fragility about that. But also I'm reminded about this great young woman called Farzana Khan, who worked with Healing Justice London. And she said, comfort and transformation do not live in the same house. They cannot live in the same house. So yes, maybe we'll have to be on the receiving end of some very difficult conversations, but I take the point. How do you have those conversations without breaking you as the conversation instigator?
It's a difficult challenge. Michelle, let me just pop you back on. Sorry,
Yeah.
there we go.
Right,
There you are.
Oh, I just love what you said then, Linda. Absolutely. And my heart was pounding and wanting to respond and hear you at the same time. And about the Public Health England data, and it comes out, and what do we do with it? How do we build on it? Actually, there's none from none from trans people, from Public Health England. There's none in the wider services, the wider issues for trans people. So how do we build on it? And also, I lay awake every night because we exist at Clinic U on a shoestring, and that's no exaggeration, none. And it's getting worse. It's going to get worse, especially with COVID and everything. And so, and it's been like that for some years, but we keep on providing a service. And when I went to Public Health England at Colindale, I went with a plan, not expecting people to know what to do around HIV and why it needed to change, why it needed to be more inclusive. I had to work with a plan, because if I just said, oh, this needs doing, how would they know what to do? And they wouldn't, with all their good intentions. And I've got some wonderful friends and colleagues that work in Public Health England and who do fantastic work. But if you don't go with a plan, an idea of what needs to change and show evidence for what needs to change, then it's much more difficult. And that works, I think, in my sense. But anyway, I just wanted to respond like that really to you. I think it was wonderful.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. Did anyone else have anything burning they wanted to discuss or bring up or ask of each other? Because I have another question that I wanted to highlight if you don't, but I will have to find it in my long list of questions here. Anything else that anyone wanted to come back on or reflect on? No? Okay. So this is actually very similar. We've had a question over email to one of the questions that I wanted to ask. So hopefully it shows that we're on the right track with our questions and our audience. So how do you, as amazing LGBTQ plus leaders, nurture future leaders? How do we support in the making, in at home, in their workplaces? How do we cultivate the next generation to take forward some of these priorities that we've been talking about? So going for a change of thinking about how we commission things for longer term, for less reliance on constant innovation and quick fixing, for that more aspirational approach. How do we be better allies? How do we encourage that in future generations? How do we put the most marginalized at the forefront, as you were saying earlier, Parminder? And how do we hold government to account? As you were saying, Phil, how do we help the next generation do these things, take on these priorities, and be the champions of the future?
So, because I think you're looking at me.
I'm looking at all panelists, all very welcome to engage on this difficult question.
It is. So from a UK Black Pride perspective, we have what's called intergenerational conversations. You cannot talk about what the next generation needs if you're not bringing the next generation to the table or creating that table or environment for them to be able to have their voices heard. I often ask the next generation, what is it that I can do better? And I never, ever want to be a gatekeeper, because I think that's something that happens within our communities. There are gatekeepers that have been there since Kanushwa, and no one's sort of moving on or bringing people along with them. So if I'm going into a meeting, I'm going to maybe speak to AZ Mag or Blackout UK or Prepster or tap into other organizations. So I think what we do is we have collaborative conversations with other organizations in our community. We have intergenerational conversations, but from a UK Black Pride perspective, I like to look at how I grow my team and how we reach out to so many different people. And in the last 15 years, where we started with, 2 people and a piece of paper and a pen that hardly worked, to now having a team of 15 and sitting there and really coming up with what is the theory of change that it will take for us to get from there to there. That's what growing, and evolving and changing and understanding that you can't hold on to something just because you're sort of very wedded to it. Because I love UK Black Pride, I'm ever so precious about it. But I also understand that if it's by us and for us, you have to reach out, and making sure that, I sponsor somebody or I mentor somebody. If I hold privilege, and I say that very, very loosely, because I don't want people to go away and say, see, Black people have got privilege. What do you mean? We have privileges at very different times. Yeah, but if I hold a privilege because I can travel to however many countries and don't need a visa, or I have access to ministers and high commissioners and diplomats, well, I need to bring somebody else along with me so that when I'm not around, they can really pick up what has already been done. It goes back to the video that you showed. You're showing us that history of what came before us. And, I like to see myself as probably very much the present, and the future is my team, who are going to be taking things forward and running with it. And I hope that they run that cycle at the same time. And when you do that and bring people along, people feel valued, they feel respected, they feel seen, and they feel visible, they feel represented. And you're also supporting them in a way that they don't feel isolated, even whilst dealing with so many of these very different challenges. And you ask hard questions that you may not necessarily want to hear. As I call myself a leader who is LGBT plus and POC and Black, many different things. But you ask those hard questions. What can I do better? So if we don't understand what it means in terms of trans rights, or what it means around, you know, how people are impacted around Islamophobia, or what it means to actually be a refugee or asylum seeker, we get our communities to tell us. And that's the only way that they will trust you and allow you to lead. Because leadership is not about being self-appointed. It's about being given that permission and that trust in order to lead something and take it forward. But collaboration is key in terms of leading and working with the next generation and working with who's there now.
Some really, really good points, Phil. Now, who wants to follow that? Because I was going to scoot round all of the panels. So, Michelle, I saw a finger go up there.
Definitely.
So let's pop on.
Okay. Well, I absolutely agree, Phil. And for me, any place that I've gained at any table, I need to step back from that table and let younger people develop anything that I might have built on, that they can develop further. If I can do what I've done, or other people without me have done what we've done, then younger people, I'm not the future. Younger people are our future. And if they need to build up their skills, give the opportunity to other people to be creative, to have their ideas flourish and go forward. And I can be in the background supporting people. And I think that's what, for me anyway, that's what I need to do, and that's what I have been doing. But it's really important that we give up our place at the table sometimes.
Making that space for the next generation, but also, as Lady Phil said, making sure that we're doing that kind of that handing over, so involving them while they're still doing a job, whilst they're still having that role, so that they're gaining the connectivity, the skills, the knowledge. Definitely. Ben, would you like to have some thoughts around how we're nurturing the next generation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm 28, so hopefully I'm not too far gone myself, but good Lord. I am speaking to younger people as well. I'm reaching out to teenagers. Like I said, I mean, I can't wait for things to get to some semblance of normality, because one of the best things about my week was going to different schools and speaking to young people. The main reason for that was because when I was younger and I had to leave one of my schools after being outed, I look back now and I see the people that kind of supported me, the other Black queer individuals that were around me via the internet. And if I look at the four of us that there were kind of supporting each other and having MSN conversations and AOL chats and stuff, I'm actually the only one that's still around. So all three of them have ended their lives. The most recent was in January of this year. All Black, all queer, and it just goes to show the kind of the experiences that people have and the difficulties that they go through, where intersectionality does kind of play a part. So my big thing for this year especially was going to be to widen out that tour and to go to as many places as possible and speak to as many young people as possible about my experiences, but making sure that they have the confidence to go forward. I love that we're talking about race. I think that's so important. I love that we're talking about sexuality and gender. I think it's also important to talk about money and class. Being a young person growing up in East London, I didn't have money. My family were actually quite poor, and I think as a result of education, I was able to get a full scholarship to go and study medicine at university, an all expenses paid scholarship. Then to study a master's, I was given another full scholarship. So these things have kind of enabled me to actually jump into the upper echelons of like society now. I'm like, oh, BBC correspondent, who would have thought? But it's only as a result of those scholarships that kind of got me into those positions. And I mean, I still live in Walthamstow, which is where my family raised me. So my mum lives literally like 5 minutes away with my dad. And I'm surrounded by my friends who weren't given such privilege and weren't given such a position and actually aren't in careers. They're in jobs, but they're not in careers. They don't have the platform that I kind of have. So on a daily basis, I'm reminded to humble myself and to kind of give back to this community, because I'm only where I am as a result of other people helping me. So that's why I started my Confidence Academy, and that's why I tour around to places in the UK that I literally haven't heard of before I see my call sheet, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to Cleethorpes, and no idea where that is, but on we go. And I think it is really important to kind of get out and to actually have those opportunities to speak to these younger people. And also it's beneficial for organizations as well. That's the other side note, away from the personal. I've given stories to the BBC and done stories with the BBC that I wouldn't have had I not gone to remote parts of the UK and spoken to people about their experiences. That representation is incredible. And for some of these organizations that spend thousands and thousands of pounds on consultants, I mean, just speak to people, just get out there, just go and speak to these younger people and find out what they want from your organization, rather than paying a big marketing agency to do your research for you.
Wise words. Thank you very much. Damien, did you want to reflect on how you will be nurturing and how we can all empower and embolden the next generation?
Yeah, sure. Politics is notoriously terrible at kind of future planning and bringing people on, usually because kind of politicians are always trying to hold on to their positions as long as they can, and they'll kind of cling on. And one of the things I've recommended it to other people as well is, so when I was elected, one of the things I said is that I wouldn't stand for more than 2 elections. So I've set myself, if I'm re-elected, I'd only stand for election one more time. And because I've got that end date in mind, I find it so helpful, because it really makes you think about, well, who are the next people coming through? And it also helps you keep your sanity as well, because you don't kind of become the mayor. You're kind of, you've got this privileged position for a period of time, and it gives you a kind of call to action, and you want to get to work quickly. So one of the things we've done, like within cabinet positions, to try and improve diversity on there is increased flexibility. We've introduced job shares for the first time in cabinet positions, which we hadn't done before, and that's been fantastic. And then they're rolling out mentoring. We've got a particular issue with the lack of racial diversity on our councils. We've got 54 councillors, but only 12 councillors are people of colour. And we've in Lewisham, that should be close to 50%. We've done before, and they just haven't worked, kind of the big training programs, and we'll still do some of this, but we've done the big training programs, had speakers and all that, fine. What I'm doing this time is actually, as Lady Phil was kind of talking, it's almost hand-holding and mentoring, like really working on a one-to-one basis with people, getting them to understand the process, working with them so they've got contact points to get them through the system, because it can be really difficult. And then one of the other things, just kind of for everyone around leadership and more on a kind of LGBT plus perspective, is that I think people have an unconscious view about what a leader is, and that generally will then, if they probably had to draw it, it's probably a kind of it'll be a big white man, well-spoken, with some children and a wife. That will be kind of like the image of the strong leader. And leaders come in all different shapes and sizes, but you need, particularly in politics, a lot of resilience, because it's amazing how people can't see beyond it. And if you don't fit that kind of stereotype of a leader, and a lot of people want that kind of alpha leader who's going to bang on the table and shout and scream. And if you're not that, then that's a real challenge for some people. And I think that kind of level of resilience, and I think there's a gender dynamic to it as well, which prevents a lot of women going into politics, and from LGBT plus people coming forward. And I just kind of think that resilience, and just be true to yourself, and don't feel you have to be a leader who's kind of acting in some role. The best advice to anybody is to be yourself, and to focus on the things that you care passionately about.
Again, some more very, very good advice. Build that resilience before you head into politics. Definitely sounds like a good idea. Parminder.
Well, there's not really an awful lot more to add. I think everybody has said, I mean, all of those things are really important. Some humility in your leadership role, and acknowledging that you don't have all the answers, and actually you may learn a lot by seeking out the experiences and thoughts and lived experiences of others. And, you know, when everyone was talking, I was just thinking about the Arab Spring, I was thinking about Hong Kong, I was thinking about Black Lives Matter, and I was thinking about all those young people that might not consider themselves even activists, let alone leaders, but are out there absolutely with their hearts on their sleeves. We've seen it here in the UK with protests up and down the country. But young people who passionately believe in something and want to have their voices heard, and, you know, completely fearless and bold. And those are the kind of young people that would be, great to be part of this movement. And so many times, what Damien was just saying about what does a leader look like, that idea of feeling like an imposter, that imposter syndrome of, well, I'm not really a leader, I'm not the right color, I'm not the right gender, I haven't had the right schooling, or I have had the right schooling, but not in the traditional way, all sorts of things that make you feel that you are less than. And I think that there is a role for all of us to acknowledge, actually, I think probably all of us here today. I mean, if you've, grown up as any part of any marginalized community, you know exactly what that feels like. You completely do. So just being able to empathize and see what it might feel like for somebody else and create an opportunity. And I think mentoring and hand-holding, advocating is one of the strongest acts of leadership I think any of us can do.
I think that's a lovely point to end on. Thank you, Parminder, and thank you to all of the panel. You've really shared your experiences, you've shared your knowledge, and I'm really very grateful for the contribution that you've all brought, and I hope that that has been enjoyable to our audience too. We can see certainly Peter enjoyed it, so that's good news. We definitely have a fan. So I'm going to invite those of you who are on the panel to not come off the call. We'll move into a green room for a quick debrief before you all head your separate ways. But this will be the close of the live broadcast now. So thank you to our audience for engaging, for your comments, your questions. We haven't been able to take all of them, but obviously if you do pop along to our different social channels, you will see the comments there as well, and we'll try and come back to you from Metro on any questions that you might have. So yes, thank you very much. And
also, thank you very much to you for facilitating.
Yeah, well done,
completely
Mark.
welcome. Completely welcome.
Charity,
It's been an absolute privilege to chat here all with you. So thank you. And should we do a little wave out, everybody? Should we wave goodbye? Night all, night all.